Speaking of presidential elections for 2024, there are still other people that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party would like to see run. And there is one person in particular that both parties have apparently spoken to. Can you guess who it is? We're going to get started with this interview here with Stephen A. Smith on CNN. So if you are not familiar with Stephen A. Smith, let me tell you who he is. I watch a lot of sports, so I've known about Stephen for a while. Stephen A. Smith is a sports commentator. Some of you may know him from the sports show on ESPN called First Take. That's how I first came to know of him. He also has a podcast as well on YouTube, and I also believe this is on Apple Podcast as well. Anyway, Stephen's all over the place. Stephen's not everyone's cup of tea. Some people like the fact that Stephen is tends to be pretty loud and in your face. And some people do not like that, right? So he's not everyone's cup of tea. But what I found very interesting is that CNN actually was interviewing Stephen A. Smith, sports commentator, about his opinion about who should run for president for 2024 and about Joe Biden. It's interesting because there are commentators, left independent media commentators, that I feel have been blackballed from networks like CNN just simply because of the fact that they were part of Bernie Sanders' campaign. I don't see them inviting on people like Brianna Joy Gray to ask her questions and pick her brain about the 2024 presidential election. I don't see them inviting on people like Glenn Greenwald, who I also feel has been blackballed in spaces like CNN. So it's really interesting to me that they're going to sports commentators to get their opinions. Pay attention to what's happening here, folks. Let's dive in.
So one of the interesting things that this has produced is really a lot of Hail Marys, it seems, of people saying this person should run, that person should run. One of them this week was Dwayne Johnson saying that he was contacted about a possible Biden run for president. Listen, or a possible run for president. Listen to what he said.
Right.
In 2022, I got a visit from the parties asking me if I was going to run and if I could run.
Wow.
And it was a big deal, and it came out of the blue.
Wow.
And it was one after the other. I was moved by that, and the reason why I had given that response, if that's truly what the people want, then of course I will consider it. And after that response, that's when the parties came.
Let me pause right there. So you guys see what's happening? Both parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, reached out to Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson to ask him to run for president for 2024. So this is interesting, especially considering that The Rock partnered with Oprah Winfrey recently for that Maui fund. You guys know that I heavily criticized that, not because they were trying to raise money for people, but because I told you that you could just donate to people in Maui directly through their GoFundMes or through Venmo instead of some fund that Oprah and The Rock created and said they had to get to a certain dollar amount in order to dish the money out to the people. It didn't make any sense to me. And there was also a nonprofit attached to it, etc. And now we see that both parties apparently are trying to get The Rock to run. But how do they feel about this? Listen to this. This is the funny part.
I mean, look, he's a popular guy, but what do you make of just the idea that, I mean, according to this, real people in politics have approached him and said, you should consider this?
Well, first of all, real people in politics have approached me and talked to me about running. It ain't happening. I'm not interested. Let me get that out of the way.
Running for president?
But let's understand, it running for president, it speaks to the level of desperation that exists in this country, Abby. That's really what's going on here. It's not about Dwayne "Rock" Johnson. It's an indictment against the presumed candidates for the 2024 election. Like you pointed out at the top of your show, you've got one former president that without question, I mean, Boo-Boo the Fool knows he will engage in a campaign of vengeance if he is the president of the United States again. He will not rest until he gets back at everybody who's gotten at him. That's his MO. In the case
So he's talking about Donald Trump here, and then he pivots to Joe Biden.
Of Biden, we're seeing somebody that just doesn't seem lucid and confident enough to be on that position 4 years from now? Maybe at this moment, yes. But do you have the confidence that he can do what you need him to do and run in this country for 4 years, starting in 2024 when he's 82 years old? The answer is absolutely not. So
let me pause there for a second, because I want you to pay attention to something that Stephen A. Smith did. He's still giving Joe Biden credit, even though it sounds like he's not giving Joe Biden credit. And let me explain. He said he doesn't think that Joe Biden is competent enough to lead this country for another 4 years. But he says that right now he's okay, but not 4 years from now. So what I'm trying to show you is that Stephen A. Smith is still giving Joe Biden credit, saying that Joe Biden is competent right now to do what he's doing. And I don't think that Joe Biden's competent right now. And I'm not even going into the next 4 years yet. I don't think Joe Biden is competent to lead this country right now. And I want to tell you, this is why I think they are interviewing someone like Stephen A. Smith instead of someone like a Glenn Greenwald, instead of someone like a Breonna Joy Gray, who has more experience in this political arena. And that is because they would probably tell you what I just said, that Joe Biden is not competent, is not fit to lead the country right now. You see, you don't get invited onto these shows without being somewhat a part of the status quo. You just don't. This is why you don't see the people that were part of that Bernie movement, with the exception of Nina Turner. They'll bring her on every now and then. But for the most part, you don't see most of these people that were part of the Bernie Sanders movement invited back onto those shows. You don't see them invited back onto CNN. You don't see them invited back onto MSNBC. They want to try to bury and hide those people as much as possible, because they never want that rhetoric to come back up again, because they still blame those supporters for the reason why people like Donald Trump won. So pay attention to that. Now we're going to go back. We're going to let him finish what he's saying here, because the people that he actually offers don't make any sense either.
82 years old. The answer is absolutely not. So guess what? If you want to ask me or anybody else, Dwayne Rock Johnson, yeah, I'd vote for him before I voted for one of those two. I mean, you got Marianne Williamson that wants to run. She's not going to get any votes.
Let's pause for a second. Let's go back again to where he says Dwayne The Rock Johnson, because I'm going to show you something here.
In 2024 when he's 82 years old? The answer is absolutely not. So guess what? If you want to ask me or anybody else, Dwayne Rock Johnson, yeah, I'd vote for him before I.
He would vote for The Rock before he voted for Biden or Donald Trump. Okay. Vote for The Rock based on what, though? What are The Rock's policies? Or what does he believe in? How does he feel about the economy? How does The Rock feel on healthcare? How does he feel about militarism in the United States and abroad? How does he feel about foreign policy? Where does he stand on this position with Israel and Gaza? How does he feel about the war in Ukraine? No, Stephen A. Smith just voting on thoughts and feelings. Do you see how this works, ladies and gentlemen? Okay. Thoughts and feelings.
What? If you want to ask me or anybody else, Dwayne Rock Johnson, yeah, I'd vote for him before I voted for one of those two. I mean, you got Marianne Williamson that wants to run. She's not going to get any votes. You know, she backed out of the 2020 presidential campaign before even people had a chance to vote.
Would you vote for a third party?
All right. So he says that Marianne Williamson is not going to get any votes. Now, Marianne Williamson is running in the Democratic Party, so she's still a part of the Democrat primary. I wouldn't say she's not going to get any votes. If she's still in this campaign through the primaries, she'll get some votes. If she stays, and she'll get some votes in reference to the primary. Marianne Williamson just increased in the polls, guys. This is something I don't think everybody's paying attention to. Marianne Williamson is now at 13% in the Democrat primary polls. She has increased since this issue, this war broke out with Israel and Gaza. And a lot of people haven't been paying attention to that. So I wouldn't go as far as to say she's not going to get any votes. Some people are going to vote for Marianne. Is she going to get the DNC nomination? I would say no. But that's the difference between bringing on someone like Stephen A. Smith, a sports commentator, and bringing on someone who's a part of the political space that they can explain it the way that I just explained it to you. There is a difference between those two. And that's why this is what I'm saying. Stephen is there to keep the status quo. Stephen is there to say Marianne is not going to get any votes so that you don't even think about voting for someone else in the Democratic Party but Joe Biden. Think about that. See, I know how this game is played. Now they go into the third party conversation. Listen to this.
Out of the 2020 presidential campaign before even people had a chance to vote.
Would you vote for a third party? Would you vote for an alternative, a third party candidate over Trump or Biden?
I would say this to you. The only reason I wouldn't is if you told me definitively that I was throwing my vote away because it would facilitate one or the other winning. But if you...
There you go right there. Ding, 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 ding. Now you see why he was invited onto CNN? You see that? That's the same message that comes from CNN and MSNBC. This is the same message that tell you, well, no, because I'll be throwing my vote away. That's why they would bring on Stephen A. Smith. Let me bring on another Black person, but not someone that's a part of the political space. Not someone that knows what the hell they're talking about. Let me go bring on a Black sports commentator and ask him about this. And I'll bring up the third party subject so that the viewers who are watching this, and we have a Black female host as well, the viewers who are watching this, African Americans won't even think twice about supporting a third party or independent candidate. That's what this conversation is about. That's why Stephen A. Smith is on this show. That's exactly how this works, folks. They're not going to bring on someone who's going to say, like, for example, if they brought on Breonna Joy Gray would say, yes, I voted for Jill Stein in 2016. They're not going to bring her on. Let's bring on a sports commentator. So Stephen says you're throwing your vote away, but then listen to who he goes to recommend as well. Not just The Rock. Listen to this.
That I was throwing my vote away because it would facilitate one or the other winning. But if you told me that we had a three-party system that really, really worked, and you really, really stood a chance, and you can look at the candidates and how viable they are. Let's take Dwayne Johnson into consideration. Highly successful, brilliant, obviously incredibly imposing, heart of gold, in the right place, cares about what's in the best interest of America. Isn't that what we're looking for when we look for any president of the United States? You want a commander-in-chief that is interested in governing all the people, not just looking out for his constituents, to those who voted for him, and throwing everybody else by the wayside. You don't...
Pause. See, Stephen A. Smith likes to talk for a long time, so I do want to go ahead and interrupt there, and I want to debunk two things that he just said in that short amount of time. Number one, so he talks about how, well, I would if there were a third party system actually in place. So this is another example that CNN and MSNBC also provide. It's another liberal talking point. You cannot vote third party or independent because we don't have the system in place, and they're not actually going to win, and da-da-da. As long as you keep doing that, you're never going to vote third party or independent, and we'll never build up third parties. We'll never build up an independent movement. Do you think RFK Jr. is sitting back there telling his supporters, don't support me now that I'm independent because we don't have the infrastructure? Hell no. He's campaigning all across this country. He's telling them to donate to the campaign. He's telling them we're going to get on this damn ballot and we're going to disrupt this duopoly. So think about this, people. If you keep doing the same thing, but you are expecting different results, that's crazy. We're never going to build any type of third-party infrastructure or any type of independent candidate infrastructure in this political system if we continue buying into what Stephen A. Smith just said, that we're throwing our vote away so we don't even vote for those candidates at all. The first step is the easiest step. Stop voting for the duopoly. That doesn't even cost you money. Think about that. The second point of his I want to debunk, he said that basically people like Joe Biden are catering to their constituents instead of trying to govern everybody. Everybody. So let's go ahead and debunk that. I would argue these politicians are not catering to their constituents. I would argue these politicians are catering to their donors, okay? See, this is what happens when you bring on someone who's not a part of the political sphere and you bring on someone who's a sports commentator. Those of us in this space, we know who the politicians actually cater towards. They don't cater to their constituents. That's why the constituents are so upset. That's why people get voted out. If Joe Biden was catering to his constituents, his polling numbers would be higher. Come on. How you sit there, you don't bring up the fact that the politicians are catering to corporate interests, corporate greed, Wall Street, the military industrial complex. You don't mention those things if you are already part of the status quo and you want to get invited back on CNN again to promote your podcast, or you don't understand how it works. Let's go on, because he's going to tell you again. Listen to who he recommends.
And throwing everybody else by the wayside. You don't want that. But which party has given us that? The fact of the matter is, you look at the Democrats and you see some of the stuff that they get caught in. I'm going to say it again. It is one of the most disgraceful things I have ever seen in the history of politics to be in the year 2023. And we're talking about liberals, progressives, relying and practically begging an 80-plus-year-old man to run for office again. That is disgraceful. Where are your other candidates? Gavin Newsom is somebody that I think he makes a very viable point on behalf of liberalism.
And that's the other reason why he was invited onto this segment. So now he's going to tell you, because he doesn't think that Joe Biden's a good idea, now he's going to tell you that Gavin Newsom is the one that should run. He's on there to promote and to recommend another status quo corporate Democrat in the system, someone who's already a part of the system. Gavin Newsom, he's the governor of California. Gavin Newsom has not been good for California. Come on, we're talking about a state in this country whose homelessness population continues to increase and outshine almost every state in this country. We're talking about a state that people have been leaving in droves because they can no longer afford to stay there. So people are leaving California and moving to Arizona and Texas, and some all the way over to Florida. That's who you want to run the country? The guy who can't fix the homeless problem in California? The guy who's losing residents to other states because it's so expensive to live there? The guy who, by the way, is related to Nancy Pelosi, which they don't like to talk about this a lot. He's related to Nancy Pelosi by marriage. Is that what we want? We want more dynasties in this office? So you see how this goes? He starts off to make you think, oh yeah, I'm interested in, pushing someone who's on the outside like The Rock because he's not a politician. Don't know where The Rock stands on these policies and these principles. Then he pivots to, well, I'd vote third party if I knew I wasn't going to throw my vote away. And then he rolls right back into keeping you in the Democratic Party and saying Gavin Newsom is the one who should be running. And just like that, they trap Black people right back in the Democratic Party. That's why they brought Stephen A. Smith on this show. Gavin Newsom, another corporate goon.
Think that he would be a strong candidate on the left. Yeah. If you're Trump or you're a Trump supporter, okay, fine, you want to vote for him, that's cool under normal circumstances. You got people out here talking about how they vote for him for president, even if he was in prison. That's how sick we are as a society right now.
I wouldn't say that's how sick we are as a society, Stephen. I would say that's how desperate the American people are. You don't have to be sick to support someone because they may be in prison or whatever. You're supporting that person because economically this country is failing. You're supporting that person because you're that desperate, especially if you're working class or you're poor. You want someone to come in and fix this issue with inflation. You want someone to come in and fix these grocery store prices. You want someone to come in and pay people more than $7.25 an hour. That's what this is about. But Stephen A. Smith is going to do what CNN typically does, and Fox News will do this, and MSNBC will do this. Let's shame the voters. How dare you? How dare you vote for someone like that? You're sick. It's always the voters' fault. It's never the politicians' fault. It's never the military-industrial complex fault. It's never the corporations' fault. It's never the real estate agents' fault. It's never BlackRock's fault. You follow me? It's always the voters' fault. But everybody else gets free reign to do whatever they want. I don't hear Stephen A. Smith on here calling out the billionaires. I don't hear him calling out the billionaire class. I don't hear him calling out fucking millionaires. And that's why he is on the show, to maintain the status quo, to tell you, you keep voting for the Democratic Party. All you got to do is swap out one status quo politician with a younger one.
Damn shame. And I cover sports. And I see sports people getting hits all the time, 25, 26, 22-year-olds being held more accountable than grown men in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who literally are elected officials in office. And they don't know how to conduct themselves better than 20-year-old sports figures that I cover every day. That's the world that we're living in. It's a damn disgrace, but it's no surprise.
So you see what happens, and I've talked about this before. They will bring on Black people to try to keep Black people in the Democratic Party. And I played this earlier, but I think most of you have not seen this. This young woman ain't trying to hear it. This young woman right here is not trying to hear it. Listen to what she has to say about voting for Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. Listen to this.
I'm not voting for Joe Biden. And there's not a goddamn thing any of you white motherfuckers on this app can do to change my mind or make me feel bad about it. I'm a Black queer woman in America. You can't make me feel bad for shit. It's way too many people in here trying to make people feel bad about not wanting to vote for him. If it's between Trump, a treasonous dictator, and Joe Biden, a genocidal fucking maniac, we don't have a lesser of two evils. And just because you don't value the lives of people of color, of Black people, of queer people in this country, doesn't mean that I feel the same. What you're really worried about is losing all that privilege that you have. What you're really worried about is finally being affected by the things that these politicians do to us. I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed with your allyship. Because is it really allyship if you're threatening people who you are saying you're an ally to into voting for someone who doesn't give a fuck about us? Y'all do this every 4 years. And 4 years from now, after whoever gets elected next year is in office and has been for a while, y'all gonna do the same thing. When does it stop? When does it end? Are we gonna be voting for the lesser of two evils for the rest of our lives? Because I'm not doing it no more. I don't care. This place has been shit for a lot of us. And if you think that you're going to make us feel bad or scare us into voting for someone who hates us with the threat of, oh, it's going to get worse, you got another thing coming. Free Congo, free Sudan, free Palestine, free Hawaii, free everybody oppressed all over the world. But liberation is not going to come by voting in Joe Biden. And if you have a problem with that, you can come fight me. But you're not going to beat me. And in the words of Katniss motherfucking Everdeen, as far as I'm concerned, if we burn and been burning, you burning with us, bitch.
Not everybody's falling for it, you know? So mainstream media has to get desperate and they have to bring on other Black faces to convince you otherwise. Particularly, a lot of younger people are just not falling for this anymore. I think Palestine was the pushing point for a lot of people, to be honest.